understand this complex genius, this visionary thinker. Will we ever get this close again, uniting the forces of our universe?
Hey everyone, it's JC and welcome to another exciting episode of Age of Reason. Today is episode 41. It's March the 8th, 2019. Just before I start, I'd like to promote my book once again, Beyond the Obscure. Please get it. It's available on Amazon. The ebook is pretty cheap. Please check out my art as well on Redbubble. So today I'm going to talk about climate change again. I have a lot of articles about it, so it's probably I have enough for the year actually. But I do have a few on religion as well, so I want to go back to that when I can. So before I start today, I'd like to go over a post or comment, actually I should say, that was left over during my last show, and it's just pretty funny. So there's this guy Vernon, and he says, I wasted 10 minutes before I gave up. This guy had better do work on his style if anyone is going to listen to him. Pictures of typhoon damage Pictures of typhoon damage in Japan accompanied by a bunch of stammering isn't going to sell the product. First of all, I'm not trying to sell a product, so already that's a fallacy right there. Secondly, unfortunately, and that's what I've been saying for a while, in my view, people's attention span has been absolutely ridiculous lately. I mean, man, if you can't focus on something longer than 2 minutes, that's a problem with you, not me. So he claims that he watched 10 minutes, that's half of my previous show. He claims that he watched half of it, yet he already clearly didn't understand that the picture I showed was from the Philippines and not from Japan. So this shows how much your attention skill sucks, okay? So that's not my fault. That's unfortunately most people's fault these days. Everybody's looking for some kind of shorter clips. That's why these YouTubers, right? The classic YouTubers absolutely went nuts on the cuts. It's a cut every 5-10 seconds. And apparently that sells, you know? That's what people like these days. But I absolutely refuse to do it this way, because I absolutely refuse to dumb things down. You can get enough dumb things out there, so I'm not going to contribute to that fire. I just want to cover that very quickly. Okay, so today the article is Are we living through climate change's worst case scenario? And it was posted on TheAtlantic, if I'm not mistaken. And basically it interviews a researcher from Stanford. And here we have a picture, actually. Man, I'm sure that Vernon guy certainly is going to confuse it again. This picture is from a power station in Poland, from a place called Bełchatów. And it was the site of the UN 2018 climate conference. So I actually looked it up because I was curious. This picture doesn't look very promising, to be honest. So I looked it up, and in Wikipedia it says this. In 2007, the Worldwide Fund for Nature ranked the power station in Europe's 11th most inefficient power station due to carbon dioxide emissions of 1.09 kilo per kilowatt hour of energy produced, and the highest absolute emitter with 30.1 million tons of CO2 per year. So it's a pretty dirty power plant. And if you think it got better, think again, because in April 2014, the European Commission ranked Bełchatów Power Station the most climate-damaging power plant in the European Union, with CO2 emissions of roughly 37.2 million tons in 2013. So just bear that in mind. The year 2018 was not an easy one for the planet. Sure, wind and solar energy kept getting cheaper, that's true. So in a lot of places, solar is already cheaper than coal, and people are switching to that because it's all market driven, right? You always pick the one that's cheaper, as long as you get the same quality. But the funny thing I find is this. there's a lot of people that complain about CO2, right? So coal plants and like natural gas. But I'd like to ask you a question. And if you're an honest human being, you'd know the answer. But I really doubt that's the case. So here's the question. Do you think that there are more, I mean, I'm talking about the US, okay? So do you think there are more jobs in coal and natural gas than solar these days? Please answer. Because if your answer is yes, then you're just wrong and you don't know about the topic. I don't know the people who watch this show. That's the thing. I don't know you personally. I only know a few people who comment regularly. So I don't know who my audience, who these people are. There's a lot of people, for example, during the Hillary Clinton campaign. Okay, I'm talking about a different thing now, but there were paid trolls that went on Facebook pages and basically smeared other candidates or posted propaganda against the candidates. So they were paid to do that. So I would not be surprised if there are people who come to my page who just happen to be also paid by the fossil fuel industry to go on all these pages, not just my page, and then post propaganda, post lies, post misinformation. I would not be surprised at all. If you're not paid and you still post misinformation about the topic, then you're just doing harm to humanity. You're misinformed and you're miseducating people, which, is shame on you. Shame on the people who buy your crap as well. So that's happened, and the electric car became America's best-selling luxury vehicle. They're talking about the Tesla Model 3 here. But the most important metric of climate health, the amount of heat-trapping gas entering the atmosphere, got suddenly and shockingly worse. I talked about that on the last show. I gave the example of China, where some sites were unfinished, and then in the latest satellite photos, they were absolutely finished and maybe already in operation. I would not be surprised. So it's definitely emissions are rising. Not everywhere, but in most places, the places that are important anyway. In the United States, carbon emissions leapt back up, making their largest year-over-year increase since the end of the Great Recession. This matched the trend across the globe. According to two major studies, greenhouse gas emissions worldwide shot up in 2018, accelerating like a speeding freight train, as one scientist put it. So the US emissions do remain below the 27 peak, but that is one of the few bright spots in the data. Global emissions are now higher than ever, and the 2018 statistics are all the more dismal because greenhouse gas emissions had previously seemed to be slowing. That's the thing. We've actually kind of curbed them, but over the past year, they did increase. Yeah, I'm just reading a comment here from the chat. That's I agree. Yeah, that's true. The religious people, a lot of them, except unless you're a pastor or a preacher, that's your job to fool people and make millions of dollars, especially in the U.S., where they can crowdfund to get a private jet, which happened. They just believe in something and are very passionate. That's true. I don't disagree at all. Many economists expect carbon emissions to drop somewhat throughout the next few decades, but maybe they won't, and that's the thing. That's what I've been saying before the show. This is a bit speculative area here because we are dealing with an unknown territory. We don't know. Sometimes you hear the best case scenario, but how about we also think about the worst case scenario? Why not? If 2018 is any indication, meekly positive energy trends will not handily reduce emissions, even in developed economies like the United States. It raises a bleak question. Are we currently on the worst case scenario for climate change? And one scientist, so Rob Jackson, he works at Stanford. He's the chair of the Global Carbon Project. He says we're actually a lot closer than we should be. I can say that with confidence. When climate scientists want to tell a story about the future of the planet, they use a set of 4 standard scenarios called representative concentration pathways, or RCPs. Now, this is important because the rest of the article mentions RCPs all the time, so you have to really understand what it is. RCPs are ubiquitous in climate science, appearing in virtually any study that uses climate models to investigate the 21st century. Each RCP is assigned a number that describes how the climate will fare in the year 2100. Generally, a higher RCP number describes a scarier fate. It means that humanity emitted more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere during the 21st century, further warming the planet and acidifying the oceans. So the best case scenario is called RCP 2.6, and the worst is 8.5. So the higher it goes, the worse it gets. That's pretty much all you have to understand from here. God help us if 8.5 turns out to be the right scenario. Well, I can guarantee you that God will not help us. Because why doesn't he help right now if he could? Under RCP 8.5, the world's average temperatures would rise by about 5 degrees Celsius or nearly 9 degrees Fahrenheit. That's an inconceivable increase for global temperatures, especially when we think about them being global average temperatures. The scenario could still be in the planet's future, according to Ziki Housefather, who is another climate scientist. He works for Berkeley Earth. Since 2005, total global emissions have most closely tracked the 8.5 scenario. There may be good reasons to be skeptical of 0.5 late century values, but observations today don't really give us grounds to exclude it, he recently wrote. Even if we avoid 8.5, the less dramatic possibilities still could lead to catastrophic warming. Jackson, the Stanford professor, warned that every emissions scenario that meets the Paris Agreement's 2.2 degrees Celsius goal assumes that humanity will soon develop technology to remove carbon directly from the atmosphere. So yeah, you've probably seen it. There are these weird kind of machines that apparently suck the carbon CO2 out of the atmosphere and convert it to whatever, oxygen maybe, but they are extremely expensive and they are not ubiquitous at all. So interest in technology, sure, why not, but the costs involved are very high. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. We should do everything possible, but I'm just saying it's expensive. Such technology has never existed at industrial scales. Even some scenarios for 3 degrees Celsius assume that at some point in the next 50 years, we will have a large-scale industrial activities to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, he said. It's a very dangerous game, I think. We're assuming that this thing we can't do today will somehow be possible and cheaper in the future. I believe in tech, but I don't believe in magic. There are some certain technologies like wave technology, right? We're using the energy of the waves in the ocean to generate energy. Again, good idea. Let's do everything possible, everything that we know. But again, it's quite expensive, and you have to look at the energy output of these things. Maybe if you have a lot of them, maybe that makes some difference. But who's gonna pay for that? Obviously, of course, at the end of the day, the taxpayers will have to bear the burden. That's how it's always been throughout history. Yet, not all data suggests that we're doomed to 0.5 or equivalent amounts of warming, Housefather cautions. If you look only at pollution from fossil fuel burning and not from land use events like deforestation, then humanity's recent record trends closer to 4.5. But I'm asking, why would you not consider deforestation in your equation? That's a very strange thing to do. You're ignoring a major... It's like, hey, let's ignore the cars and airplanes suddenly. It's going to make a difference to your number. It's going to make the number lower. But does that reflect reality, though? Not really. Deforestation and, cement production, that's another one that is not always mentioned. Again, huge emitters, but you have to consider them all. You can't just eliminate something because it's convenient for you. It's not how science works at all. So the 8.5 scenario may also become less likely in years to come even if major polluters like the US, China, and India never pass muscular climate change policy. RCP 8.5 says that the global coal industry will eventually become 7 times bigger than it is today, which is very unlikely, let's be honest there. It's tough to claim that it is a business as usual world. It's certainly a possible world, but we also live in a world today where solar is increasingly cheaper than coal and readily available. The sun is always there, whereas the coal reserves are gonna run out eventually. So we have to deal with that at some point. But I think we might as well start early. So let's start now. Do whatever we can. In fact, like I was saying on the previous show, there are people in the world who are already very much affected by climate change. Try going to some islands in the Pacific. These are tiny nations. They have sovereign status, but the ocean water is rising. Every time there's a typhoon, it gets worse. These places are awful, by the way. The standard of living there is very bad. Sometimes they have a very kind of makeshift toilet for the whole village there. That's the level I'm talking about. But these people suffer a lot from climate change. Whereas me, okay, I don't have a job because of, health issues and stuff like that. I don't get unemployment benefits, by the way. Don't jump to that conclusion either. But I live in an apartment. It's made of brick. Even if there's a strong typhoon outside, it's very, very unlikely that something's going to happen. But these people, though, who live in huts, literally, of course, they're going to be affected. Jackson urged caution. We don't know yet what scenario we're on, he said. I think most climate scientists will tell you that we're below the 8.5 scenario. But every year that emissions increase, like they have this year, it makes the 8.5 scenario more plausible. And the article finishes. Jackson published his first academic paper in '89, just a year after the NASA scientist James Hansen first warned Congress that global warming had begun in earnest. I asked whether he thought actual emissions would ever come close to RCP 8.5. It's nuts, he said, but I used to think a lot of the things were nuts, and then they turned out to be not nuts. So that's the thing. We say all kinds of scenarios, and people go, oh, that's nuts, it's absolutely unreal, and then it happens. A good example I like to give is with cell phones. I think, if you lived in the 80s, for example, there's no way you thought that, come on, in basically 15 years, let's say you go from the late 80s to 2005 or so. Come on, there's no way that people back then thought, oh, I'm going to have a mini computer in my pocket. No way. I certainly didn't. And I grew up with video games and all of the tech devices you can imagine. Even I didn't think that would be possible so quickly. And yet it was. So anyway, just bear that in mind. This is all just information. The more information you have, the more informed you are, of course, and the more educated you are. So it doesn't mean that this is going to be true, but it's a possibility. It's a viable possibility. And that's actually all I wanted to cover today. I did it pretty quickly. Okay. Well, if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on YouTube, and please don't forget to check out my book on Amazon, Beyond the Obscure. Check out my art on Redbubble. I will try to do a show next week, and like I said in pre-show, I really want to cover that guy who talks a lot of nonsense on philosophy, so we'll see how it goes. And it will be a break for me from climate change as well. So until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.